Margaret Alcorn had reconciled every invoice at Kellner-Voss for 11 years, and on the morning of the going-away party, they moved her desk into the hall to make room for the cake. She did not argue. She unplugged her own monitor. She carried her own chair. In the glass conference room, in front of 30 people, the chief operating officer set his coffee cup down on her desk mid-meeting. He waved a hand at her without looking, and he told the room, "Just leave the temp there. She's basically furniture. Furniture doesn't file." They laughed. What Grant Weller didn't know was this. The contractor nobody had ever revoked access from had spent 3 years quietly copying 2 sets of books, and that morning, she had finally addressed the envelope. If you have ever been treated as invisible by the very people who counted on you, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one move something in you, subscribe and stay to the end, because the end is the whole point. And do me one favor, comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Meg took the contract 11 years ago. It was the spring after her husband got laid off. Ray had worked the line at the Delham gearbox plant for 19 years, and then one Friday the plant was a press release, and their life was a number that no longer added up. Meg had a 2-year accounting certificate from the community college in Merrow and a steady hand with a ledger. That was all. Kellner-Voss needed someone to clean up their accounts payable for a few months. A contractor. Cheap, temporary, no benefits, no title, no promises. She said yes because they needed the money that month. She stayed because, it turned out, she was very good. You have to understand what she actually did, because nobody in that building ever really did. Kellner-Voss Infrastructure Group managed public money, big public money. They held the reconciliation contract for the Regional Transit Modernization Account, the fund that paid for new buses and rebuilt depots, and the signal system on the East Line. Hundreds of millions of dollars moved through those accounts over the years, and Meg was the one who knew where every dollar went. Not the executives, not the auditors who came through once a year in nice shoes. Meg, she could tell you which invoice paid for which culvert. She could tell you why the March numbers looked wrong and why they were actually right. She kept the whole living map of that money in her head and in her files, the way a lighthouse keeper knows the coast. She trained people too. That was the part that stung, if she let it, so mostly she didn't let it. She trained a young man named Kevin, who became a senior analyst and moved to Columbus. She trained a woman named Priya, who made manager in 2 years. She trained Trevor Nunn when he was 26 and didn't know a debit from a doorknob, and Trevor was the controller now. Controller, he signed things. He had a corner of the glass room and a parking spot with his name painted on it. Meg had a lanyard. The lanyard held a plastic badge, and the badge said her name, and under her name, in small gray capital letters, it said contingent, non-employee. She clipped it on every morning. She badged through the same doors the staff walked through free, because the staff badges opened automatically, and hers had to be tapped and held. A small thing. She noticed it every single day. She was 52. Her hands were steady. Her back ached by 4 o'clock. She brought her own coffee in a thermos because the good machine was for employees, and the other machine tasted like a penny. She said good morning to everyone. Most of them said it back without seeing her. There is a kind of person who keeps a company honest without anyone knowing. Meg was that person. And there is a kind of company that mistakes that quiet for weakness. Kellner-Voss was that company. Now I need you to hold on to one thing she said, because it comes back. It comes back at the end like a door swinging shut. It was a Tuesday, a slow one. Diego, the new staff accountant, the young one, 26 and still polite, asked her how she kept track of so much old paper. And Meg, half joking, half not, said this. Nobody ever revoked my read access when the last controller quit. 3 years now. I can still open anything. She tapped the side of her monitor. And I keep my own backups. At home, too, because when something goes wrong here, they don't look for who did it. They look for the contractor. They blame the contractor first. So I keep receipts on myself. Diego laughed a little, like it was a joke. Meg let him think it was a joke. It was not a joke. It was a loaded gun, sitting on the wall, and she just told you where it hung. The first cut was small. Most first cuts are. It was a Thursday morning in early autumn. A client was visiting, some pension board that had money in the transit fund, and Trevor came around the cubicles making the floor look presentable. He stopped at Meg's desk. She had an ergonomic chair, the one good thing she'd asked for in 11 years, because her back was bad and the doctor had written a note, and even then it had taken 4 months to approve. "Hey, I need this chair for the conference room," Trevor said. He was already tilting it back, testing the wheels, like it was his. "Client's coming. You can grab the folding one by the printer." "That's fine for now. Fine for now." Meg looked at the folding chair by the printer. It was metal. It was cold. It was the kind of chair you sat in for 45 minutes at a wake. "That's a medical chair, Trevor," she said. "Quiet. There's a note on file. It's one day." He was already rolling it away. "It's not a big deal, Meg. Don't make it a thing." She didn't make it a thing. She got the folding chair. She sat in it for the rest of the week, because Trevor forgot to bring the good one back, and Meg didn't remind him, because reminding him would have been making it a thing. By Friday, her back was a fist. She drove home with a heating pad on the seat and didn't tell Ray, because Ray would have called somebody. And Meg had learned a long time ago that when the contractor calls somebody, the contractor is the one who ends up looking difficult. She clipped the folding chair open every morning that week, and every morning she clipped on the lanyard. Contingent, non-employee. Tap and hold. She thought once, standing at the door with the badge pressed to the reader, that the building itself agreed with them. Even the doors treated her as a guest. That was offense number 1. A small one, remember it. There are 2 more coming, and each one is bigger. The second one had witnesses. It was a team meeting, the kind Meg was required to attend and never invited to speak in. 10 people around the glass table, Meg in the second row of chairs against the wall, because there wasn't a seat for her at the table. There had never been a seat for her at the table. She had her notebook. She always had her notebook. They were talking about the quarterly close. Weller was running it. Grant Weller, the COO, 44. A man who wore his watch on the outside of his cuff, so you'd see it. He was the finance side of the house. He was the one everyone wanted to impress. And he knew it. And he spent that, knowing like a rich man spends small bills. Somebody asked who was going to pull the backup documentation for the transit account. It was a big ask. Thousands of files. Weeks of work. The room went quiet the way rooms do when nobody wants the job. And Weller, not looking at her, not turning his head, jerked a thumb over his shoulder toward the wall where Meg sat, and said, "Have the temp pull it. That's what she's for. That's what she's for." He said it the way you talk about a stapler. Have the machine do it. And then he moved on, right past her to the next thing, and the meeting kept going, and Meg wrote in her notebook, calm, in her small square hand, the words "pull transit backup docs," because it was her job, and she was going to do it well. But one person at the table flinched. Diego, the young one. He looked over his shoulder at Meg, and there was something on his face. Something that made her feel for 1 second seen. He half opened his mouth. Then he looked at Weller, and at Trevor beside Weller, and he closed it again. He was 26. He had a student loan and a lease. Meg understood. She gave him a small nod, the kind that says it's all right. Don't spend your job on me. And he looked back down at his laptop. Ashamed, here is where the story turns, though nobody in that room could have felt it turn. Because Meg went and pulled those transit backup documents. Weeks of them. She was the only one who could, really the only one who knew the account well enough to know what was supposed to be there. And when you know what is supposed to be there, you notice what shouldn't be. She was 3 days into it, deep in the depot rebuild files, cross-checking against the payment register, when she found an invoice that made her stop. Vantline LLC, $19,000. For site preparation and grading at the Eastgate Depot. Meg frowned. She knew the Eastgate Depot job. She had reconciled it. She had the photos even, because the field engineer sent photos, and she filed everything. There had been no separate grading contractor at Eastgate. The site prep was done in-house by the general. It was in the master agreement. She'd matched it herself. There was no Vantline. There had never been a Vantline. She looked it up. Vantline LLC had been paid 4 times that year. Site prep. Consulting. Materials handling. Round numbers, all of them. 19,000. 22,000. 31,000. The kind of numbers that don't come from a real invoice, because real invoices have odd cents on them. Real invoices say $418.63. These were too clean. These were made up by a person who thought clean looked professional and didn't understand that clean is exactly what looks fake to someone who reads invoices all day. Meg sat back in the folding chair. Her back ached. She looked at that clean, false number for a long time. And she did what she always did. She made a copy. She kept a receipt on herself. She told herself it was probably nothing. A miscoding. A vendor she'd forgotten. She told herself that for about a week, the way you tell yourself the noise in the car is probably nothing. But she kept pulling the thread. At night, at her desk, after the floor emptied out. And the thread did not end. It got longer. That brings us to the party. If you have ever been the person nobody remembers to include, this next part is going to sit in your chest. Take a breath before it. It was a Friday. A manager named Doug was leaving for a better job, and the office threw him the kind of party they never threw for anyone who stayed, which is its own small comedy if you've worked anywhere long enough. Balloons, a banner, a sheet cake from the good bakery, the one with the buttercream, because Doug mattered. Meg's desk sat at the front of the bullpen, near the glass conference room, in the natural path of any gathering. It was a good spot for working. It was a bad spot for a party, because a party needs a table for the cake, and there, right there, was a perfectly good surface with a woman sitting behind it who nobody quite counted as a person. Trevor came over first. He didn't ask. He just started moving her things. We're going to set up here for Doug, cool? Not a question. He picked up her stapler, her pen cup, the framed photo of Ray and their daughter at the lake, and he set them on the floor. On the floor. Meg picked up the photo before his shoe found it. Then 2 of them lifted her desk. Her whole desk, with her monitor still on it, and they walked it out of the bullpen and into the corridor, the hallway that led to the copy room and the bathrooms. And they set it down against the wall under the fire extinguisher, her desk, in the hall. You're good out here, right? Trevor said. More quiet anyway. And he laughed, because to him it was generous. He had given her quiet. Meg carried her folding chair out to the hall herself. She set it behind her exiled desk. She sat down. She could still see into the bullpen from there, through the gap, could see them wheeling in the cart with the cake, could see the balloons. And then it got worse, because Weller came out of the glass conference room with a client on the phone, saw the little relocation, saw Meg's empty desk spot now hosting a sheet cake, and he wanted to make the room laugh. That was the thing about Weller. He always wanted the room. He set his coffee cup down on the corner of Meg's old spot, now the cake table. He gestured at where her desk had been, welcoming everyone in, 30 people crowding up for cake, and he raised his voice so it carried, and he said, "Yeah, just leave the temp out there, she's fine. She's basically furniture." A beat. For the timing, because he had timing. Furniture doesn't file. And the room laughed. 30 people. 30? Diego didn't laugh, and 1 woman from HR didn't laugh. But the room laughed, a real laugh, the easy laugh of people who feel safe. And it rolled out through the glass wall and down the corridor to where Meg sat behind her desk under the fire extinguisher. She heard it. All of it. The word furniture, the word file, the laugh. Now I want to tell you that she stood up. I want to tell you she walked in there and said something that put him on the floor. That's the story we all rehearse in the shower. The perfect sentence. The mic drop. That is not what Meg did. And that is why this story ends the way it does. Meg sat still for a moment. Her face didn't change. That was a skill she'd built over 11 years, the still face, the face that gave them nothing. Inside, something went quiet and cold and very, very clear. Not rage. Clearer than rage. Rage is loud. This was the opposite of loud. She turned to her monitor. Her read access still worked. Nobody had ever revoked it. And there, in the corridor, under the fire extinguisher, 3 feet from a party that had made her the punchline, Margaret Alcorn opened the Vantline folder. Furniture doesn't file, he'd said. She started to file. The next stretch of weeks, she worked 2 jobs. The one they saw and the one they didn't. By day, at the hall desk, she reconciled. Normal work. Invoices, registers, the quarterly close. She was pleasant. She said good morning. She tapped and held her badge. She was, to all appearances, exactly the piece of furniture Weller had described, sitting in the hallway, useful, silent, easy to walk past. By night, after the floor cleared, she followed the Vantline thread all the way down. And down was a long way. It started with that $119,000 invoice. It did not stay there. Meg pulled 3 years of records, and Vantline LLC was everywhere. Grading, consulting, materials. Change orders on jobs that had no change orders. A payment here, a payment there. Always under the threshold that required a second signature. Always clean round numbers. Always tucked inside the transit modernization program where the money was federal and state and nobody watched a single line too closely because there were so many lines. She built a spreadsheet. Her own at home, on her own machine. 1 column for every Vantline payment. She cross-checked each one against the actual work. The field reports, the photos, the completion certs she'd filed herself over the years. And payment after payment, the work was already accounted for somewhere else. The grading Vantline billed for had been done by the general and paid to the general. The consulting had no deliverable, no report, no email, nothing. It was air. It was money paid for air. When she totaled the column, she sat back in her kitchen chair and looked at the number for a long time. $18,600,000. Give or take. Over 3 years. Billed to a public transit authority. Paid out of money meant for buses and depots and the signal system on the East Line. The money that was supposed to keep the trains from hitting each other. This was not a rounding error. That was the first thing she'd told herself, that it was probably a miscoding, a rounding error. It was not. It was a machine. Somebody had built a machine to take public money and send it to a company that did nothing, and they had run that machine for 3 years. And it was smooth. And it was quiet. And it worked. Because who reconciles the reconciler? Who watches the furniture? Then she found the second layer, and it got personal. Because it had a name on it. Vantline LLC had a registered agent. Meg looked it up, because looking things up was her whole life. The address was a up store 2 towns over. The agent of record was a man named Curtis Hale. It took her one evening on the county property site and a wedding announcement in the archive of the Marrow paper to place the name. Curtis Hale was Grant Weller's brother-in-law. Weller's wife's brother. The company that billed $18.6 million for nothing was owned by the COO's family. Trevor's fingerprints were on it too, not the ownership. Trevor wasn't that stupid, or he thought he wasn't, but the invoices went through the controller's approval queue, and the controller was Trevor, and Trevor had approved every single one. His initials, his timestamp. He had processed the machine. He probably told himself he was just doing what Weller said. That's what they all tell themselves. Now here is the part that matters most for how this ends. Because Meg did the thing that most people never do. The thing that turns a victim into something the law can stand behind. She warned them. In writing. Twice. The first email went to Trevor. Careful, professional, dated. She wrote that she'd found billing discrepancies in the transit modernization account relating to a vendor, Vantline LLC, that required review before the close. She kept it flat. No accusation. Just, this needs a second look. She'd been in the game long enough to know you flag it clean, and you let the record hold your hand up. Trevor replied in 4 minutes. She kept that too. Handled, Vantline's a legit sub. That's above your access anyway. Don't overthink it. Focus on your close. Above your access. He said it like a wall. He did not know that no wall had ever been built in that building that Meg couldn't read straight through, because they'd forgotten to revoke her, 3 years running. She waited 2 weeks. She flagged it again, higher this time, a second dated email, this one copying Weller himself, framed as a compliance courtesy, discrepancies remaining, recommend review prior to any external audit. She was giving them the chance to fix it. That's the truth of her. And hold on to it, because it's what makes the ending clean. She gave the people who called her furniture a written, dated chance to do the right thing. Weller never replied. Trevor replied for him, one line. Meg, this is closed. Please don't email leadership on things outside your scope. Outside your scope. Closed, she printed both threads. She saved them 3 ways. 2 dated warnings. Ignored. In writing. Timestamped. The building had just handed her the last piece she needed, and it thought it was putting her in her place. Then came the night she understood there was a clock. She'd stayed late, later than usual. The floor black except for the exit signs and her one lamp in the hall. She'd gone to the copy room, and the copy room shared a wall with the glass conference room. And the glass conference room had Weller and Trevor in it, late, and men who think they own a building forget how sound carries when the building is empty. She heard Weller's voice through the glass. Low, but not low enough. The state transportation audit hits in 40 days. I want the Vantline files clean before then. Reconciled. You understand me? Cleaned and reconciled. I don't want a single line in there that a state auditor can pull a thread on. Get Diego to run it, the kid does what he's told, and if he asks, tell him it's a standard year-end cleanup. And Trevor, what about the old backups? Shred the paper. Purge the drive copies. If it's not in the system, it didn't happen. Meg stood very still in the dark copy room with a stack of warm paper against her chest. Cleaned, reconciled, shred the paper. Purge the drive copies. 40 days. She understood, standing there, that it had just changed. This was no longer $18.6 million of theft. Theft is a thing that happened in the past. What she'd just heard was a plan for the future, a plan to destroy the evidence, to erase 3 years of stolen public money before the auditors came, and to use Diego, the one decent kid on the floor, the one who'd flinched for her, to do the erasing without knowing what he was erasing. They were going to make the honest one bury the bodies. 40 days. That was the clock. In 40 days, the paper burns and the drives get wiped and the machine disappears clean, and if anyone ever asks, there was no Vantline, there was no 18 million, there was just a standard year-end cleanup run by a temp and a kid. Except for a woman in a folding chair in a hallway who kept receipts on herself, who had never been revoked, who had 2 dated warnings they'd ignored, who had a spreadsheet at home with the whole machine laid out in a single column, and who had, that morning of the party, from a desk under a fire extinguisher, begun to file. Furniture doesn't file, he'd said. Meg walked back to her hall desk in the dark. She sat down in the folding chair. She did not cry. Her face did the still thing. And in the quiet, the cold, clear thing that had opened up in her chest at the party finished forming into a shape, and the shape was a decision. She had backups. 11 years of them. Both ledgers. The real one and the one they showed the world. The access nobody revoked. The email thread where she'd warned them, twice, dated. Curtis Hale and the Up Store and the wedding announcement. Trevor's initials on every approval. Weller's voice. In her memory now, 40 days, shred the paper. She had all of it. She had had all of it, in pieces, for 3 years, without ever meaning to become the woman who would use it. She'd only ever wanted to do the job well and go home to Ray and sleep. She'd told herself, all those years, that staying invisible was what kept her safe. That if she never made a thing of anything, they'd leave her be. She saw now that she'd had it backwards. The invisibility had never been her shield. It had been theirs. They'd stolen $18 million in front of her because they were certain the furniture had no eyes. The furniture had eyes. And a folding chair. And 40 days. She went home. She didn't wake Ray. She sat at the kitchen table where she'd built the spreadsheet, and she made a plan, quiet and orderly, the way she made everything. First, the media. She copied 11 years of evidence onto an encrypted drive, and then a second one, because you keep a receipt on your receipt. The dual ledgers, the Vantline column, the 2 warning emails and the 2 dismissals, the registered agent record, every approval with Trevor's timestamp. She organized it the way she organized everything, clean, indexed, so that a stranger opening it would understand the whole machine in 20 minutes. Then she found the address, not the state auditor. She'd heard what they had planned for the state auditor. She went 1 level up, to the federal building downtown, the Office of Inspector General, the whistleblower office that handles fraud against federally funded programs. And the transit modernization money was federal. She knew exactly how federal. She'd reconciled every dollar of it. She wrote a cover letter, 1 page. Flat, factual, no anger in it, because anger was not the point, and never had been. She stated who she was. Contractor, 11 years, reconciliation, transit modernization account. She stated what she'd found. She stated that she had warned the company twice, in writing, and been told it was above her access and closed. She stated that she had reason to believe the records would be destroyed within 40 days ahead of a state audit. She attached an index of the evidence. She put it in an envelope. She addressed it in her small square hand. That was the envelope from the beginning. That was the one she'd addressed the morning of the party. Half finished then. A thing she wasn't sure she'd send. She was sure now. And she understood exactly what she was choosing. She was 52. This contract was their whole recovery from Ray's layoff. The thing that had kept the house. If any of this went sideways, if they smelled her before it was safe, they would not fire the furniture. They would come for her. Disgruntled contractor. Difficult. She'd seen what they did to people far less alone than her. There would be no reference, no severance, nothing. Because you don't owe furniture severance. She thought about that for a long time at the kitchen table, with the 2 encrypted drives in front of her, and the addressed envelope beside them, and the coffee going cold. The way things always went cold around her, unnoticed. Then she thought about Diego, 26, who said good morning, being handed the shredder and told it was a year-end cleanup. She thought about the signal system on the East Line, and the buses that didn't get bought, and every ordinary person who paid taxes into that fund and rode those trains and trusted that somebody, somewhere, was watching the money. Somebody was. Somebody had been the whole time, in a hallway, in a folding chair, tapping and holding a badge that said non-employee. Meg Alcorn picked up her pen. She finished the address. She did not confront. She did not cry. She did not rehearse the perfect sentence. In the morning, she was going to do 2 things. She was going to drive downtown before work, walk into the federal building, and hand the whistleblower office everything. And then, she was going to drive to Kellner-Voss, clip on her contingent lanyard, tap and hold at the door, sit down at her desk in the hall, smile, and hand Grant Weller the reconciled report he'd asked for. And he was going to take it without looking at her. Because furniture doesn't file. She turned off the kitchen light. And somewhere in the dark of that ordinary house in Merrill, Ohio, a clock that Grant Weller thought he controlled had just started running for the other side. And he had 40 days. And he didn't know it. And he wouldn't know it. Until the morning the wrong kind of lanyards walked through his lobby door. But that morning was still weeks away. And between here and there, Margaret Alcorn was going to have to sit 3 feet from the men who mocked her, day after day, smiling, reconciling, saying good morning, while the envelope she'd mailed made its slow way through a system none of them could see. She just had to not flinch. She just had to stay furniture a little longer. The morning she acted, Meg Alcorn woke before the alarm. She lay in the dark and listened to Ray breathe beside her. 19 years at the gearbox plant, and then a letter, and then the quiet that came after. She had taken the Kellner-Voss contract to fill that quiet. 11 years ago. She had meant it to be temporary. She got up. She did not turn on the bedroom light. In the kitchen, the 2 encrypted drives sat on the table where she had left them. The envelope sat beside them, addressed in her own hand to the Federal Office of Inspector General. She had sealed it the night before. She had checked the address 3 times, the way she checked everything 3 times, because that was the habit that had made her good. And being good was the only thing they had never been able to take. She made coffee. She drank it standing up. Then she did the thing. She did not confront anyone. She did not cry into the sink. She did not rehearse a speech in the bathroom mirror. She picked up her keys and the drives and the envelope, and she drove downtown while the streetlights were still on. And she parked in the garage across from the federal building, and she waited on a bench in the lobby until the whistleblower office opened at 8. A young man took her in. He had a soft voice and tired eyes, and he did not once look at her the way the men at Kellner-Voss looked at her. He looked at the drives. He looked at the printed index she had made, 1 page, everything cross-referenced. The way she indexed everything. "You built this yourself," he said. "I reconcile," Meg said. "It's what I do." He asked her how much. $18.6 million, she said, over 3 years. Billed to the Federal Transit Modernization account through a vendor that doesn't do any work. The registered agent is the chief operating officer's brother-in-law. I have the invoices. I have the approvals. I have the 2 emails where I flagged it and was told it was above my access. He was quiet for a moment. "You understand what happens now," he said. "This becomes ours. It moves on our clock, not theirs. You may have to sit in that building for weeks and say nothing." "I've sat in that building for 11 years and said nothing," Meg said. "I can do a few more weeks." She signed where he pointed. She left the drives. She kept a copy for herself, and she mailed the envelope from the box on the corner outside, because a woman who keeps her own backups keeps a backup of the backup. Then she drove to Kellner-Voss. She clipped the contingent lanyard on at the garage. Non-employee, it said, in the small gray letters that let her badge through the doors the staff walked through free. She tapped and held at the side entrance until the light went green. She walked past the glass conference room where they had put the cake on her desk, and she walked into the hall where her desk lived now. The folding chair still there, waiting. Grant Weller came by at 9. "You've got the transit reconciliation for me," he said. Not a question. He did not slow down. "Right here," Meg said. She handed him the report he had asked for, the clean one, the one that showed exactly what he wanted the numbers to show, because that was what he had ordered, and she was this morning going to give him exactly what he ordered. He took it without looking at her. He walked off reading it, nodding, pleased, and Meg Alcorn sat down in her folding chair in the hall. And she smiled. And she said good morning to Diego when he passed, and inside her chest a thing she had carried for 3 years finally set itself down. She had done the right thing quietly. Now she only had to survive being invisible a little while longer. The days after were the strangest days of her life. Nothing happened. That was the strange part. The office went on exactly as it had. Trevor Nunn condescended to her at the coffee station about a variance that wasn't a variance. Blythe Cottrell held in all hands and talked for 20 minutes about integrity, about how Kellner-Voss did the right thing even when no one was watching, and 30 people nodded, and Meg sat in the back near the door in a chair she'd carried in herself, and she did not change her face. She reconciled. She reconciled exactly as she was told. She smiled, and she badged, and she said good morning, and every night she drove home to Merrow and told Ray it had been a normal day, because it had. The irony of it sat on her like a warm coat. They mocked the furniture. The furniture had already filed. The whole room was a stage, and only she knew the play had a second act. And the second act was already running somewhere she couldn't see, on a clock she'd started and couldn't stop. Once she overheard Weller on the phone in the glass room, the door half open, his voice low and clipped. "It's just an insurance thing," he was saying. "Prep for the audit. Cover the bases." He was talking to a lawyer. She knew the shape of that call the way you know weather. It was not an insurance thing. It was subpoena prep, and he thought it was routine, and he was wrong, and he would go on being wrong for weeks, and there was nothing in her face when he hung up and saw her at her hall desk and looked straight through her. Furniture doesn't listen either, he must have thought. If he thought anything at all. She did not flinch. Then came the afternoon that nearly ended it. She was at her desk in the hall when she heard Trevor's voice go tight 2 doors down. The audit was close now. He was nervous. She could hear it. Nervous men do careful things badly, and what Trevor decided to do that afternoon was pull the access logs on the Vantline files. He wanted to know who had touched them. He wanted to know before the auditor did. Meg's hands went still on her keyboard. Her logs were in there. Every time she'd opened the folder. Every export. 3 years of her fingerprints on the one thing that could hang all of them. If he found her name, he would understand everything. And he would tell Weller. And Weller would move. And the 40 days would collapse into an afternoon. She sat very still and she listened to Trevor click. She heard him mutter the names as they came up. Staff names. His own. Diego's once he was scrolling the employee access table, the one that listed everyone who worked there. And Meg was not in it. She had never been in it. 11 years, and the system had never once filed her under staff, because she wasn't staff, because she was a contractor, because she was contingent, because she was furniture. Her access sat in a different table entirely. A gray little table called Vendor and Contingent Access that nobody ever opened. Because why would you? There was nothing in there but temps and printer contracts. She heard Trevor scroll to the bottom of the staff list. She heard him say, half to himself, nobody. Good nobody touched it. She heard him close the window. Meg breathed out slow through her nose. The thing that had wounded her for 11 years had just saved her. They had made her invisible, and now the invisibility was a wall they couldn't see her behind. Trevor went back to his cubicle satisfied that no one had ever looked at the files that Margaret Alcorn had memorized. She picked her pen back up. She finished the line she'd been reconciling. She just had to stay furniture a little longer. It turned out to be 9 more days. On the morning it happened, Meg knew before anyone else, because Meg always got there first. She badged in at the side door at 7:40. She was at her hall desk with her coffee when the lobby doors opened at 9, and it was not the state transportation auditor who came through them. It was 4 people in plain dark coats, and they had lanyards, and the lanyards were the wrong kind. Not visitor stickers, not vendor tags. Federal, they wore them clipped at the chest the way Meg wore hers, except no one was ever going to call these people furniture. They asked the front desk for Grant Weller by name. Meg did not get up. She sat in her folding chair in the hall, 3 feet from the glass room, and she watched over the top of her monitor. Weller came out smiling. He thought it was the audit. He'd been ready for the audit for 40 days. He had a firm handshake ready, and a conference room booked, and a clean set of reconciled records that Trevor had spent 2 weeks preparing. And he walked toward the agents with the easy confidence of a man who has already won. "You must be here for the review," he said. "We've got everything pulled and ready. Right this way." The lead agent did not shake his hand. "Mr. Weller," she said, "we're not with the state. We have both sets of books. We've had them for several weeks, We'd like you to come with us." Meg watched his face. She had wondered for weeks whether she would feel triumph in this moment. She did not. What she felt was quieter than that. She watched the confidence drain out of Grant Weller's face 1 degree at a time, the way water leaves a tub, and she watched him understand slowly that the clock he thought he controlled had been running for the other side the whole time. "Both sets," he said. His voice had gone strange. There's only. The filing predates your reconciliation by several weeks, Mr. Weller," the agent said. "Whatever was cleaned, it was cleaned after we already had the originals." And then, he did the thing Meg would remember. He turned. Some animal part of him turned to find the person who could fix this, the person who always fixed things, the reconciler. And his eyes swept the hall and passed right over her folding chair without stopping. Because his eyes had been trained for 11 years not to see her. And even now, even drowning, he could not make them land. The furniture had filed. And he still couldn't look at it. They did not put him in handcuffs in the lobby. It was quieter and worse than that. They walked him back through the office, past the cubicles, past the coffee station, past 30 people who stood up slowly over the tops of their partitions to watch. And they walked him right past Meg's desk in the hall. And for 1/2 of 1 second, Grant Weller looked down at the folding chair, and the woman in it, and the gray lanyard that said non-employee, and something moved behind his eyes that might have been the beginning of understanding. Then he was gone into the glass room, and the door closed, and the blinds did not. For a while it looked like they might still win. That was the part nobody tells you about doing the right thing. It doesn't finish clean. Within 2 days, the firm's lawyers had a story, and the story was Meg. She heard it secondhand, then firsthand. A disgruntled contractor. A woman who'd been passed over, who resented the staff, who'd fabricated a grievance out of spreadsheets she didn't understand and couldn't properly access. There was talk of a non-disclosure agreement she'd supposedly signed 11 years ago. There was a word being used in the glass room, and the word was defamation, and it was pointed at her. A man from the firm's outside counsel asked her to come into a small room. He was polite. He was terrible in the way polite men can be terrible. He slid a document across the table, and he told her, gently, that things would go easier if she signed it, that she was a contractor, that she had no protection, that a woman her age with a laid-off husband and a mortgage should think very carefully about a defamation suit she could not afford. Meg looked at the paper. She did not touch it. "I flagged the Vantline discrepancies twice. In writing, on dated internal emails," she said. "Both times I was told it was above my access. Do you have those emails? Because the government does." The polite man's face did something small. "I keep my own backups," Meg said. "I always have. When something goes wrong here, they blame the contractor first. I learned that a long time ago." She stood up. She left the paper on the table. She went back to her folding chair in the hall, and she waited because she had learned to wait, and she trusted the system she'd handed it to more than she trusted the room. What closed the door was Diego. They subpoenaed him because his name was in the logs, the one staff name that had touched the Vantline files. For a day, the office assumed he was part of it. He was 26. He was terrified. He was the only one who had ever said good morning to her. But Diego, put under oath, did the thing the polite men had gambled he was too young and too scared to do. He told the truth. He said that Trevor Nunn had handed him the year-end folder and told him to reconcile it, and that when Diego had asked what reconcile meant on invoices that didn't add up, Trevor had told him to change the dates and drop 2 line items and not overthink it, because it was above his pay grade to overthink it. He said Trevor had used the word cleanup. And that was the end of the fabrication story. You cannot call it a lie a disgruntled contractor invented when your own controller told a staff accountant to alter the records. The malicious fabrication defense fell over in a single afternoon, and after that it was not a matter of whether. It was only a matter of how, and in what order, and to whom. They did it in the glass conference room. Meg would think, later, that the government could not have known what that room meant. To them, it was just the biggest room with the longest table. They did not know it was the room where the cake had gone on her desk. They did not know it was where Weller had said the line. But they seated the executives there anyway, in the same chairs the party guests had filled. And they set the printouts on the same table, and the blinds stayed open so the office could see, and it was, without anyone planning it, perfect. They brought Weller in first. He had bluster left. Men like that always have one last tank of it. You have no idea what you touched, he said, to the agent, to the room, to the air. You have no idea how this works. This is politics. This is a witch hunt. You people don't understand infrastructure financing. The agent slid a single sheet across the table. Meg could see it through the glass. She knew what it was before he did. It was an email. It was his own email, forwarded up the chain by someone, an internal joke he'd typed the morning of the party. Just leave the temp there, it said. She's basically furniture. Furniture doesn't file. He'd written it to Trevor. He'd thought it was funny. He'd thought it was safe, because who reads a controller's inbox? Under it were 2 more sheets, 2 emails. Dated, from M. Alcorn, Contractor, subject line, billing discrepancies requiring review. The ones he'd ignored, the ones Trevor had answered with handled, don't overthink it, that's above your access. The agent tapped the top sheet, the furniture joke. You told your controller she couldn't file, the agent said. She'd already filed. And she warned you first. Twice. In writing. You just weren't reading your contractor's email. Grant Weller looked at the 3 pieces of paper for a long time, and through the glass, from her folding chair in the hall. Margaret Alcorn watched the last of it leave his face, and she did not smile, and she did not gloat, and she did not need to. They came for Trevor at his cubicle. He did not get the glass room. He got his own gray partition, with the motivational mug, and the photo of a boat he didn't own yet, and an agent stood over his shoulder and turned his own monitor toward him and showed him the message thread. His instruction to Diego: change the dates, drop the 2 lines, clean up, his name on it, his timestamp, the careful man's careful fingerprints on the one thing he'd been sure his name was nowhere near. Meg happened to be walking past with a stack of the last reconciliations anyone would ever ask her to do. Trevor saw her. For the first time in 3 years, Trevor Nunn actually looked at her. "Why didn't you just come to me?" he said. He didn't look up all the way. His voice was flat and dry and lost. "If you saw something, why didn't you just come to me first?" Meg stopped. She reached up and she unclipped the contingent lanyard from her collar, the gray badge that said non-employee, the one she'd clipped on every morning for 11 years to badge through doors these people walked through free. She held it in her hand a moment. Then she set it down on the edge of his desk, gently, the way you'd return something you'd been loaned. "I did," she said. "Twice. You told me it was above my access." She walked on. She did not look back to see his face. She had already seen everything about Trevor Nunn she was ever going to need to see. Blythe Cottrell they saved for last, and Blythe Cottrell had a plan. And the plan was the one she'd been building for years, without ever admitting it to herself. "I never saw those invoices," she said, in her own corner office, with the good light and the view. "I sign what my finance people put in front of me. That's what a chief executive does. I trusted my team. If they deceive me, then I'm a victim here, the same as anyone. I never saw a single Vantline invoice in my life." She'd banked on that. Years of not looking. She'd thought not looking was the same as not knowing, and she'd thought not knowing was a wall. The agent laid out the approvals. They had her signature on them. Not the invoices, she was right about that. She'd been careful never to touch an invoice. But the payment authorizations, the account transfers, the certifications to the Federal Transit Authority that the work had been performed and the funds properly spent, signed B. Cottrell 4 times that year, each one over a Vantline draw, each one a sworn statement that a woman who never looked had personally verified the very thing she was now saying she'd never seen. You certified these to the federal government, the agent said. Under penalty. 4 times. Blythe Cottrell's willful ignorance, which she had built so carefully to be her shield, became, in the space of 1 sentence, her charge. You cannot preach integrity at 30 people every quarter and then sign what you refuse to read and call the refusal innocence. The not looking wasn't deniability. The not looking was the crime. And in the same frame, through the same glass, at the same hour, the woman who had looked at everything sat in a folding chair in the hall, vindicated by the exact records the executives had spent 40 days trying to destroy. It moved fast after that, and it moved without Meg's hands on it, which was the way she'd wanted it. She had built the file. The system did the crushing. That was the covenant, and it held. In the lobby, where the wrong lanyards had walked in, they named the rest of it out loud, for the record. Vantline LLC, a shell registered to a UPS mailbox 2 towns over. Agent Curtis Hale, brother-in-law. $18.6 million in fictitious work, billed to a public transit fund over 3 years. The padded lines, the clean money that was never clean. The firm's public transit account frozen that same afternoon. Every draw stopped. The whole modernization program pulled into receivership pending the case. Nobody frozen it because Meg pushed a button. She hadn't pushed anything. She'd kept receipts. The receipts did the rest. She drove home to Merrow that night, the same way she'd driven home every night. She told Ray it had been a big day. She let him make her a cup of tea. She slept for the first time in 3 years, all the way through until morning. 6 months later, there is a porch. It belongs to a rented craftsman house 2 towns over from Merrow, and it faces east, and in the mornings, the light comes up over a hedge that needs trimming and lands warm on the boards. Margaret Alcorn takes her coffee out there now. There is no lanyard around her neck. There has not been for months. Her collar is bare, and it feels still faintly strange, the way a ring feels gone after you've worn it long enough to forget it. She consults now. On her own terms. 3 clients, small ones, a school district and a medical practice, and a family trucking outfit. And every one of them calls her by her name. Margaret, they say. Or Meg. They put her on the phone and they say, Meg, can you look at this? We can't make it balance. And she looks. And she makes it balance. Because that is the thing she has always been able to do. And now the people she does it for know she can. The Whistleblower Award came through in the spring. It was not a fortune. It was enough. It paid off the mortgage that Ray's layoff had put a shadow over. The same house-shaped fear that had pushed her into the Kellner-Voss contract 11 years ago. The fear that started it all bought the peace that ended it. Ray planted tomatoes. He is bad at it. She lets him think he's good at it. The other she hears about the way you hear weather from another county. Grant Weller is under indictment. The partner track he wanted is a set of court dates now. The last she heard, his lawyers were the ones asking for more time, watching a clock, hoping it would slow down. It won't. Trevor Nunn is cooperating. That is the word they use. He traded everything he knew for a softer landing, the careful man careful to the very end, and the thing he had to trade was Weller, and he traded him. Meg feels nothing about it. She used up all her feeling about Trevor in a cubicle 6 months ago and never restocked. Blythe Cottrell resigned. The press release said she left to spend more time with her family. Everyone who reads those knows what those mean. Her name is off the building. The integrity speeches are somebody else's problem now. And Diego texts, now and then. He got a new job at a firm that treats him well. Last week he texted her a photo of a letter and 3 words. She read them on the porch with her coffee going cold, and she laughed out loud into the quiet morning. Alone. Happy. I passed. CPA. She texted him back. Of course you did. You said good morning. She thinks about it sometimes, in the East Light, how simple the whole thing had been at the center of it. They moved her desk into the hall so they wouldn't have to look at her. They called her furniture so they could stop seeing her as a person who counted things and remembered them. They made her invisible on purpose, because invisible people are convenient, because you can do things in front of furniture that you'd never do in front of a witness. They never once considered that furniture keeps every receipt, that the woman in the folding chair, badging in with a lanyard that said she didn't belong, had belonged more than any of them, had known where every dollar went, had warned them twice in writing and been told to sit down, and had then, in the quiet, done the one thing they swore she couldn't. She filed. Meg finishes her coffee. The light has moved up the porch boards while she sat. Somewhere down the street, a screen door bangs and a dog barks once and goes quiet. She has a call at 10 with the trucking family. They can't make March balance. She already knows why. She figured it out last night, at her own table, in her own house, under her own name. She stands up. She goes inside to work. And if you've ever been the one they moved into the hall, the one they talked past, the one they were sure would never do anything because you never made a sound, I hope this one found you. Comment the city you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this traveled. She rinses the mug in the sink and sets it on the drying rack beside the one that was there yesterday. 2 mugs. Her husband leaves early for the plant, a different company, one that called him back inside of a month because it turns out a man who can read a machine and fix it quietly is rarer than anyone admits. He kissed her on the back of the head at 6:15, and she heard the truck go down the gravel before the light was fully up. This is their life now. They moved here in February, a rental craftsman with a furnace that clunks and a back porch nobody had bothered to paint in a while. And she loves it with a ferocity that surprised her the first time she noticed it. The way you can love something specifically because nobody handed it to you. She opens her laptop at the kitchen table, and the light is coming in through the window over the sink. The same honey-colored light that came through every window in every kitchen of her life. The light that doesn't care what happened to you last year or who called you what. Her spreadsheet is open from last night. Martinez family hauling, 4 trucks, 2 drivers misclassified, 1 vendor invoice posted twice in August, and a fuel account that someone set up under the wrong entity and has been quietly bleeding a few $100s a month since before anyone noticed. She noticed. She noticed in 40 minutes on a Tuesday evening with a cup of tea going cold beside her. Because this is what she does. Because this is what she has always done. She looks at where the numbers are supposed to go, and she sees where they actually went, and she makes them honest again. The Martinezes call her Ms. Alcorn, their daughter, who handles the books, called her last Thursday to ask if she'd be willing to take a look at their payroll setup too, and Meg said she would, and quoted a rate that would have felt like asking too much 18 months ago, and feels now like a reasonable exchange for 11 years of knowing exactly how this breaks. There are 3 folders on her desktop. 3 clients. That is all she has taken. All she wants for now. She does not have a lanyard. She does not badge through anyone's door. She does not get reassigned to a folding chair by the printer, or talked past at a meeting, or left out of the loop on decisions she will later be blamed for enabling. She works from the kitchen table, or the porch when the weather is right, or occasionally from the back booth of a diner in town where a woman named Ruthann keeps her coffee warm without being asked, and they have never once had a conversation about anything that mattered, which is itself a kind of peace. The mortgage is manageable now. The Whistleblower Award, which came through in November, was not a windfall. It was a remedy, the precise closing of a gap. It paid down the thing her husband's layoff had threatened, the number she had carried in the back of her mind for years like a stone in a coat pocket. It is gone now. The coat is lighter. She doesn't think about Kellner-Voss the way you'd expect, the way it turns on a loop and keeps you up. She has thought about it and set it down. The way you set down something you carried farther than you had to, but did carry, all the way to the right place. Done. She opens the Martinez file. She finds the line she marked last night. She fixes it. Outside, the dog down the street has started up again, a big lazy bark at nothing, and a kid somewhere is already riding something with a squeaky wheel up and down the sidewalk. That sound that means morning is properly underway. That means the day has decided to begin, regardless of what anyone thinks about it. She works. The light moves across the table. The numbers come right.